Our repair vehicle is a 2000 Honda Civic 1.6 dual overhead cam engine, and we're going to be adjusting our valves today, intake and exhaust. The tools required today for our valve adjustment: long extensions for our crank nut, 19 millimeter and a ratchet, pliers for our hose on our valve cover. We're going to need a spark plug wrench. We're going to need a 10 millimeter with an extension to remove our valve cover and accessories. We're going to need an angled wrench for our valve adjustment and a screwdriver to adjust our valves. What we're going to do first is we're going to remove our access cover for our spark plug wires and spark plugs. So let's do that. I'm going to lay this aside so no parts get lost. And now we have our spark plugs and spark plug wires. What we want to do is we want to twist our spark plug wire, gently pull up, release it off of our spark plug. Now that we have our spark plug wires removed, we're going to remove our spark plugs. What you're going to want to do is lay these out in number order so they can be replaced back in the proper hole. Now we're ready to remove our valve cover. All we're going to do is we're going to slightly pry up on our valve cover, see if it's free. Once we get our valve cover loose, we're going to want to come over here and remove our hose. And as we lift this up, I'm going to pull it across so we can get that hose off of there. Make sure you get all the gasket up with it. We're going to reuse this gasket, so we're going to want to make sure that we don't tear it, rip it. If we do, then we're going to have to go and replace it. Now we'll just set this aside. What we've done here is we've turned our wheels all the way to the left, and there's an inside plastic inner fender well. You're going to have to move that back, and when you look up in there, you're going to see our crank nut. What we're going to do is we've attached a 1/2-inch drive ratchet to this with some long extensions, and what we're going to do is we're going to actually be able to crank our engine over. It's pretty easy without our spark plugs in there. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to rotate our crankshaft, and we're going to bring it up to number 1, top dead center. We can see the up on our camshaft pulleys. We want to make sure that those are right straight up. We're straight up here. Want to make sure they're straight up. We can line those up with our rails. Now that we have our cam timing straight up, this is going to allow us to adjust our intake and exhaust valves. Our intake is 6 to 7 thousandths, and our exhaust is 7 to 8 thousandths. Our exhaust valves are located on our exhaust side of our head. Our intake valves are located on our intake side of our head. So we're going to adjust number 1 cylinder now. We're actually going to take a socket. We're going to loosen this up. We're going to insert our feeler gauge here. This is a 4-valve system, so we're going to do 2 exhaust and 2 intake. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a socket and we're going to loosen our nut. We're going to access. We're going to put our screwdriver in there. We're going to take our feeler gauge and we're going to run it on the back side of the cam. We're going to tighten our screw till our feeler gauge just barely drags. We're at 8 thousandths right now. We're going to hold that. We're going to take a wrench and we're going to tighten that nut down tight. And then we're going to recheck and make sure we have a slight drag, which is perfect right there. Now we can do our other valve. Now that we have our exhaust valves adjusted, we're going to go to our intake valves. And again, I want to mention that the engine needs to be cool. It needs to be less than 100 Fahrenheit. When adjusting our valves, loose is better than tight. If you tighten it too tight, what's going to happen is that the valve will hang open and will not give you the proper compression. What we're going to do is we're getting ready to adjust number 3 valve set, intake and exhaust. What we're going to do is we're going to rotate our engine counterclockwise 90 degrees. Now that we've rotated our camshaft 90 degrees, this allows us to adjust number 3 cylinder intake and exhaust valve. Now that we have our number 3 exhaust and intake valves adjusted, we're going to turn it 90 degrees counterclockwise. Now that we've rotated our camshaft 180 degrees, this allows us to adjust our number 4 cylinder intake and exhaust. Now that we have our number 4 intake and exhaust valves adjusted, we're going to rotate our camshaft 90 degrees counterclockwise. Now that we've turned our camshaft 270 degrees or another 90 degrees, this allows us to adjust number 2. Now that we have our valves all adjusted, we're going to reinstall our cover. We want to make sure that our gasket is seated properly, our valve cover seats down real nice. What we're going to do before we put our nuts on, we're going to reinstall our spark plugs. So in case one of our nuts finds its way down in the cylinder, we don't need to go chase it. So we're going to put our spark plugs right back in the same order in which we removed them. We're going to reinstall our gaskets on our 4 corners. And we're going to install our closed nuts on our 4 corners. Then we're going to install our open nuts. And we're going to torque these down to 17 foot-pounds. Once we've installed our valve cover, we're going to reinstall our spark plug wires. We want to push them down, make sure that they're nice and firm into our spark plug. We're going to reinstall our spark plug wire holder. Now we can reinstall our spark plug wire cover. So now that concludes our installation. So let's start it up and see how she runs. Sounds great.